Could a drop in NBN's value pay off for Aussies in the form of cheaper plans?
And will Facebook's new unsend message feature save the day?
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, as always, by Adam Turner, a man who desperately doesn't want me to tell you about his secret Ian Moss tattoo. Adam, are you at least going to let me tell the nice people about which body part it's
No,
on?
where a man has his Ian Moss tattoo is his own personal business, but let's just say it'll never get sunburned.
Ah, down in the flame trees area, I see. This week, we're also joined by a man whose dedication to living journalist cliches is so strong, and I swear I'm not making this up, that he's had a glass of wine for breakfast every day this week. From Finder, it's Angus Kidman. Angus, welcome back to the show.
Thanks as always for having me. I'm disappointed to report wine for breakfast is not as much fun as you would think after you do it 3 days running.
So what's the thinking behind that? How can wine for breakfast save the day?
I don't know if it can save the day, but it might be able to save my stomach. I've been testing out the Vogue wine diet, which involves basically taking a 1970s Vogue crash diet where you basically drink a bottle of wine every day and eat a couple of eggs and seeing if I can lose any weight.
I'm sure you're going to lose something. I'm not sure if it's weight, though.
While we wait for Gus to get on the scales, we'll shift back over to the show. And this week, we're pondering on Facebook's decision to let you cancel your messages, as well as examining the ongoing stoush around the value of the NBN and what that really means for your broadband plan costs. But first, over to the tech news desk. Adam, what's happening in tech?
Google has been forced to ban 29 apps from the Google Play App Store after revelations that they were secretly stealing users' pictures and other data. The apps were downloaded more than 4 million times before they were removed, and 3 of them accounted for 3 million of those downloads alone. Other apps were found to be forwarding users to phishing websites in an effort to steal sensitive information, as well as trying to steal contact details of users under the guise of letting you claim a prize.
Google has released a password checkup extension for its Chrome browser that it says will check if any of your passwords has already been compromised, prompting you to change them and stay safer online. Google says that it's not gathering up your passwords for its own uses, but instead checking them against public databases of already compromised accounts and logins. It's a free download and possibly not a bad idea if you're concerned about your internet security. And if you're not, you probably should be.
Australia's copyright police have turned their attention to YouTube, with site blocking laws set to target sites which make it easy to rip audio content from YouTube videos. Pirate hunters claim that the ability to download the audio from a video is in competition with legal music streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music. The new piracy laws also allow for faster blocks of mirror sites and expand the legislation to sites that not only have the primary purpose of piracy, but also those who have the primary effect of infringing copyright.
LG has finally announced when the LG V40 Thin Q phone will launch in Australia. Sort of. It'll cost $1,299 outright and will launch in early February, so basically right about now. First announced back in October last year, it's taken its time to come down under, and the timing is all kinds of weird, given that LG also confirmed recently that it will launch its next flagship phone, the LG G8 Thin Q, at Mobile World Congress in just 3 weeks' time.
So, Gus, Google wants to check my passwords just to make sure my passwords are safe. That doesn't quite add up for me. It makes me a tad uncomfortable. What are we talking about here?
So the way that this extension works is that if you stored your passwords in the Chrome browser, which lots and lots of people do, and which is a better idea than just having the same password you remember yourself, let's be clear about that. If you've made that decision, it will check those passwords against known breaches, so big databases of, hey, this password, this account has been stolen, and warn you and say, hey, this password you were using appears to be compromised. You should think about it. There's a little bit of a concern about, Google's looking at my passwords, but it only works if you already decide to let Google look at your passwords anyway. So I think in that way, it's a helpful extension that it might alert people who otherwise don't know about these things to say, hey, I really should think about better password hygiene than what I've got right now.
And realistically, like Google aren't looking at your passwords. There's no person going, hey, you use password 1 over here and password 1 over here.
No, Google's just saying it's got a stored thing, which is your list of passwords. It's got a stored thing of problem areas, and that's completely automatic. So there's not a human being involved in that. And in that way, I think it is. It's a useful improvement. It's a bit of a step up, but in itself, it doesn't stop people using dumb and terrible passwords everywhere.
Look, I've got to say, I think, some security is better than none, but given there are actually free alternatives in terms of dedicated password management apps, I'd be much more comfortable with that kind of approach, especially as many of them will let you keep everything local. And in fact, some of the paid ones, if you do want to spend money, will do exactly the same kind of compromise checking and reminding on, recent breaches, even calculating out random passwords for you. That's still going to be my preferred option for this. But I guess if you want an easy approach and if you want a Google back thing,
absolutely. But password managers are what people should use, but we know that people don't want to use them. They either get confused by them or they don't want to pay. You're better off using Chrome's password manager than using no password manager at all, because it might make you more likely to vary up those passwords a little bit. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not crucial. I still maintain if you want to check what's been violated, just go and look in your spam and see which passwords are showing up with that ridiculous message that says, hey, I managed to catch a video of you enjoying yourself while watching some adult sites. And that will tell you all the passwords that are compromised and out there in the open.
So, Adam, when you and I are chatting on Facebook Messenger, all too often we're just, swapping cat gifs, and then I'll accidentally let slip that the brain slugs that control me are coming to invade the planet and I've sold out humanity. And then I have to wipe your mind with scotch, and that gets really expensive over time.
But expensive taste in scotch.
He likes to think he does. I've wiped his mind with cheap scotch too many times now. But the point is, Facebook's actually making it so that your liver might actually survive the next time I let that secret slip.
Yes, they're introducing, I guess, what you call a panic button and an oh shit button. It lets you retract a Facebook message, so not a post, but a message that you sent to another person. You've got 10 minutes to retract it, but of course, only if the person hasn't already read the message. So you've kind of got to be hoping that that person was doing something else for 10 minutes and didn't see the message. Once they've read it, you then need to take the extra step of the scotch and the mind wiping, and that gets a lot more complicated.
So this is the equivalent of that staple 80s sitcom plot where somebody had to break into someone else's house and steal their answering machine tape,
was
right?
Seinfeld and other things, and they're climbing up the drain pipe to eliminate, get rid of the message on the answer machine. Yeah, basically this is just the modern Seinfeld equivalent.
I think Friends is the really classic example of that, where Monica dials in remotely trying to wipe the message that she's left, and then ends up wiping the whole message and then feels like she has to leave the country.
I knew that you would know that, Gus. Do you think this is a feature that people genuinely want?
Yes, I think some people do want it because it is a recurring meme. As you say, it goes back to the 80s. I can remember the excitement when suddenly in the mid-90s you could retract Lotus Notes messages, and that shows how old I am. But I think
Are you wearing an onion on your belt at the time?
I'm wearing an onion on my belt right now because it was the only thing I was allowed to eat along with the eggs. But that's beside. I think it speaks to the fact that we realise that in any communications medium, we make mistakes, and we like the idea of being able to try to recall them. So I think it speaks to that need. It's a good advance, but as you pointed out, it's not perfect, because once someone's read the message, you deleting it doesn't stop the impact happening. So yeah, there'll be some demand for it, but there'll also be a chorus of people going, oh, hey, this doesn't solve my problem because I said something stupid and someone screen capped it.
You also create that problem, though, that maybe you do get to it before they've read it for whatever reason, and then they're looking at this thing saying, there was a message here that was deleted from Alex, and you're left going, well, hang on, what was he trying to say? What's he trying to hide?
Exactly.
And that's when you've got to make something up, which is another classic 80s sitcom. Like, what could go wrong at that point? Just compound the lie. Yeah.
Exactly. Journalistically, it's the equivalent of when someone sends you a recall saying, hey, I want to recall press release A. You actually didn't want to read press release A, but as soon as they recall it, you go back into your email and find the original message to work out what they stuffed up.
So PR tip, do that and we'll read the messages. But no, you're quite right. Adam, I also understand that it's not exactly something that's like across everything you can get Facebook on. And let's face it, you can get Facebook on just about everything, but not every platform seems to support it.
Looks like for the moment it's coming to iOS and Android, and we don't know whether it will come to Windows, Mac, and other platforms. But perhaps what's not what's more interesting is not where you'll be able to use it, but how long some people have been able to use it for. Reportedly, the bigwigs at Facebook have had access to this feature for almost 10 years. So they've enjoyed this secret delete button. And finally, obviously, something's crossed the line and they're going, you know what? We maybe should share this with everybody else. Maybe, actually, it's probably, oh God, we desperately need a good news story, people. Sit down, think about it. What are we going to do?
Like, what can we do that doesn't involve Zuckerberg? Because that's not helping us. So let's think of a different strategy. Oh, let's just tick off this little nice to have feature. It could work. I don't think the platforms matter. We're in a mobile first universe. Yeah, people who are only using Facebook on their desktops are of no consequence.
But what's really unclear to me about that though is because you're right, mobile first, but a lot of people will have a Facebook tab open at work on their browser or that kind of thing. What happens if I delete a message because I can do that there on the desktop? Is it hidden? Is it not hidden? And how confused are people going to be the first time they see that if they don't know about the feature at all?
I assume it will, even though you don't have the option, I assume you'll still see a thing saying this message was deleted in the same fashion that we're used to seeing on Gmail or on Slack or various other things. Yes, people will be confused, but people are confused every day by the fact that they don't know what order their Facebook newsfeed is coming in. So this is just one more level of confusion for the platform.
One of the things that they've said that is a little bit confusing, they've said that if a removed message contains inappropriate content, then you can still report that conversation, which kind of stops, I guess, cyberbullying where you say something terrible about someone and then delete it. But the thing is, if you didn't get to read it, then I don't know how you got to see that it said something terrible. So maybe you're just guessing this person's being a jerk.
But also,
I'm not quite sure
there is
how that's going to work.
There's auto-reporting in Facebook. So there are, like, if you're a clever troll, you don't use the phrases that trigger that stuff. But if you say something that's manifestly offensive, it should show up. It should, I'm stressing should, show up in that auto-detected thing. So you could get busted for a message you deleted even if the other person didn't see it, would be my take on that.
Because the algorithm decides you're being a jerk.
Well, that algorithms decide that every day.
Yeah, I think we're also putting a lot of faith here in Facebook's own reporting standards, which, let's face it, are appalling at the best of times. So I wouldn't be thinking, well, I can still report that deleted thing, or I can report that deleted thing because I thought it was bullying, because I reckon your odds of Facebook doing anything about it are essentially nil anyway.
True, and it's also like your prime bullying targets are teenagers, and everything tells us that teenagers are only using Facebook to keep an eye on what their parents are doing.
So where else do we want an unsend button? We've got one in Gmail. We've got one in Office 365 and Exchange. I think they might only work within their own ecosystems, though. Do you think that we'll see them anywhere else? Do people really want this, or is this just a novelty that they're bringing in because it sounds good?
Everyone wants it. The challenge, and I think you rightly highlight this, is that it only works typically within an ecosystem because it's only when you've got control of an ecosystem you can make that work. Standard messaging protocols like email just don't have that built in as a standard function. So you have to trust that the platform is there and it's going to work and there's all these rules around it. I think it's really clear people like the idea, but I think it's technically hard, and ultimately it is just because people don't want to have to think about the consequence of their own comments.
See, this is the thing. You say everyone wants it. I've got to say, I probably don't, and I don't precisely for that reason of consequences. Living, in a rapid communications world as we do, there's an awful lot of kind of rapid message sending where people don't think about that kind of stuff, and saying to them, oh, and look, you can actually just retract it if you click anyway. It doesn't really teach them anything. You learn a lot more from your mistakes than you do from just being able to paper over them.
Surely one of the big candidates for using this is those drunk messages to your ex in the middle of the night. But the thing is, you're unlikely to sober up in the next 10 minutes and realize that was a really bad idea. By the time you wake up the next day, it's done and over. So, Alex, it's time for a hot serve of our soup du jour, the NBN. What's happening this week?
Well, there's quite a lot of varied NBN news this week. The ACCC put out its fourth Measuring Broadband Australia report, and for the first time, it split the speeds out by connection technologies. Now, this only concerns fixed line, so it's only HFC, FTTP, and FTTN, and it makes for some interesting reading. The good side of this story for the NBN...
Sorry, can I interrupt? You missed the curb. which would be in there too.
They didn't break out Curb as separate, and I don't know that they've got anyone that they're testing with Curb. What's interesting here is the good news side of this is that by and large, speed and the speeds that the providers are able to give people are remaining fairly constant. We're not actually seeing degradation of services. The bad side of this, though, is that because they've broken it out by category, we can now see how bad and how many underperforming services there are likely to be and which technologies they're on. Now, Adam, let's play a little guessing game here. You've got HFC, you've got fibre to the node, and you've got fibre to the premises. Where do you think the underperforming services are?
Can I buy a Val?
I don't think you need a Val,
I think
sir.
I need a Val.
You need a consonant.
I think I need a big fat N for node.
That is exactly right. Give
me another one of those sweet consonants.
Exactly. The average for fibre to the premises in terms of download performance is around 88.9%. For HFC, it's 88.1%. But for fibre to the node, it's only 79.6%. Now, if they take those underperforming services out of the mix, so if they said, right, let's not count the underperforming services, and underperforming services, by their definition, are ones that give 50% or less of the promised speed. So you've bought a 50 meg plan, you can't even get 25, or you bought 100, you can't even get 50, that kind of thing. Take the underperforming services out, and fibre to the node jumps from 79% up to 89%, basically identical to fibre to the premises and HFC. So in news that will not shock any long-term listener to Vertical Hold, it turns out that fibre to the node's not very good for around 8% of consumers, according to these figures. But of course, it could be more because they're only a sample, not the entire NBN community.
Shocked. I am shocked. I am speechless. Gus, are you shocked and speechless?
We're all speechless. It's like, obviously, it's like, yeah, of course we knew this was coming. Of course it was obvious that when you decided to use ratty, rain-rotted copper that was sneaking under the road and that Telstra neglected for 2 decades, it would suck. Like, we knew this was coming. It's really nice to have an official report after having, frankly, spent a decade bringing this up in NBN press conference to be told, oh, no, our copper is amazing. It's like, yeah, it's really good to have the data there. I don't want to sound bitter and vindictive, but, yeah, really, people, we knew this was coming.
Well, speaking of, copper being amazing, one company that doesn't seem to think that copper is all that amazing in an NBN context is Telstra. And Telstra weirdly has come out in attacking copper because of NBN's SkyMaster satellite services. And you might be thinking, but hang on, satellite, they're not like trailing bits of copper up to that, are they? And the answer is no, they're not. But what's been happening slowly over time is the number of services being proportioned out to the SkyMaster satellites, especially on the edges of metropolitan areas, has crept up because NBN Co said, oh, look, that bit's too hard to build. They can just have satellite over and over and over again. The problem for Telstra is that SkyMaster NBN people keep their copper phone lines. And Telstra's got the gig to maintain those through to at least 2024. And it's suddenly finding this increasing quantity of copper that it's responsible for.
Oh, poor baby.
Yes, I feel so sorry for them. My heart is freaking bleeding. But it's interesting because it's the politics of these things. Like, because SkyMaster, you could look like you're doing a social service when you said, oh, hey, we're offering a satellite service and this is going to people at the back of Bourke. Like, we're generally doing something helpful. And to be clear, SkyMaster is a massive improvement for people in remote areas. So much better than what they got before when they were dealing with the national incumbent provider, whoever that was. But the odd thing is the politics are not the same when you work out that this is what applies to people who are living on the nice fancy bits of the Central Coast or are living on the inaccessible bits of the Monitor Peninsula. These are not people who are doing it tough, but somehow they've ended up with satellite because actually trying to run out any of the other technologies to those houses was just a bit too hard.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And it also raises that ongoing question. I mean, we've certainly seen data that suggests that landline take-up isn't what it used to be. And whether or not Telstra gets regulated past 2024 will also be really interesting to see, because you can bet the moment they're not regulated, they will either say to these people, right, well, if you want a copper phone line, it's going to cost you, Buster, or they'll just simply let it fall to the ground and rot where it sits.
Because they've got form there.
They certainly do. Right in my street. But anyway.
And Gus, you
Bigger
mentioned
question you were going to ask us. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned kind of the politics of it, and the other big story in NBN land this week has been Labor signalling that they might be looking at a costs write-down for the NBN.
So what does that mean in English?
Yes. This is all about the kind of the political trickery of the NBN. So a notion that's applied to the NBN as long as it's existed under both under Labor and under the coalition was that this was going to be a business that eventually could be floated. It would be self-sustaining, and as such, all the money that you spent on it didn't actually have to go on the budget. It was stuff you could spend on the side because eventually you'd make the money back and the valuations would work out. Now, I think it's been pretty evident to us that that wasn't going to happen. The fact that in the last round of expansion, instead of privatising part of the NBN, the decision was made that the government would lend us some more money, showed that they didn't really think it was going to be a sustainable business. And this has actually been the background issue for the NBN for a long time. But what's it going to look like when it's finished and what happens? The idea was you would sell it. The reality is you can't really sell it because it doesn't look competitively great. And recognising that, we've now had the first sniff of a suggestion from Labor to say, we might revalue the NBN. We might essentially say, okay, the NBN's actually not worth the $50 billion you've invested in it. It's only worth $25 billion. And that might be realistic in terms of what's actually happening, but it has accounting consequences because suddenly the NBN becomes a cost instead of becoming something that was just always off the books and eventually we'll sell it. So it's really acknowledging that this was a piece of infrastructure. We can spend on infrastructure and not do that, but we didn't do it with the NBN. And the fact that Labor, which did actually start this model, to be fair, has said, look, that might not work. We might just have to go, it's what it is, would work out. Now, all of this is accounting trickery. Like, nobody cares about that really on a day-to-day basis. The practical consequence of saying the NBN is worth less is that it might mean that NBN could lower its wholesale charges. If NBN lowers its wholesale charges, then our plans might get cheaper. And I think it's pretty clear that most consumers would like NBN plans to be cheaper because the shock that everyone's experienced when they found out, hang on, I'll get the NBN, but unless I pay more money, it won't be any faster, has been one of the things that stopped people taking it up. So I don't know, would cheaper NBN plans, do you think that would make the NBN in its current messed up copper form more palatable, Adam?
Yeah, I think there are some people, like there's a certain segment of the population who would like us and just say, shut up and take my money and give me whatever you can give me. So it's not necessarily going to make a difference for them. But then there's another segment of the population, like my parents, who are like, we don't care. We're relatively happy with what we have before. So it's not going to make much of a difference to them either. It's the people in the middle that they need to shift if they really want to see a difference.
Yeah, I guess the big thing it might do for them, and I suppose it depends on when they do this write-down, and obviously if, because they've only said, look, we're thinking about it. They've floated the idea, and there's a bit of pre-election strategy in there as well, obviously. But it depends on when, because NBN Co also has this issue that they're reaching increasing numbers of the population in terms of premises that could hook up, but people are not hooking up in great waves of enthusiasm, and dropping the price might make it a bit easier for them to sign up those customers who are holding out for all of their 18-month window, which of course then is also good for the NBN bottom line.
Depends whether you think they're holding out over price. I don't necessarily think they're holding out over price. They're holding out over the fact that they've heard people constantly bagging the NBN for the last few years, and they're thinking, I don't want any part of this.
I think it's even simpler than that. No, it's simpler than that. People don't like switching. This is something I know from what I do and work. People don't want to change anything. If it's there and it seems to be working vaguely, you might whinge about it occasionally, but you keep going. No one wants the hassle of changing a service, whatever that service is. And I think the biggest resistance factor for NBN is not the fact that it's not cheaper certainly doesn't help. But the reality is, as long as this is working, I don't want to have to deal with someone coming around to my house and my router changing and all this kind of stuff. Most people will go on. This is also evident in the fact that when the NBN does arrive, most people stick with the provider they have. Most people don't take advantage of the fact they've got all these choices. Most people just go with what they're going with. Most people just don't want the hassle. It's just like, let me watch Netflix in peace.
And that just about wraps up yet another episode of Vertical Hold. Now, as always, we love to get your feedback on the show, so feel free to send us a comment via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page, but probably not Facebook Messenger. Thanks again to Gus for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm racing off to the scales right now.
Thanks everyone for listening. Remember, we're on a big push to reach more people this year, so it really helps if you can jump on iTunes or your podcasting platform of choice, leave us a review to help spread the word. Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
Because his brain is obviously working and mine isn't.
Which is astonishing given all the wine. But anyway.